had just shut my eyes, and well, it came, a soft, insistent knock against my bedroom door. My heart leaped with a sudden convulsion. Too late for it. Too damned late. The clock on the nightstand on my side, 12:17 a.m., read. Quiet was the whole house, like the stillness of safety wrapping around me always. Tonight felt dot off. For a moment I thought I'd imagined it. The wind, the house settling. Then another knock. This time more deliberate. I sat up, my pulse quickening. Something was wrong. "Mom?" a voice called from the other side. I exhaled, relieved but still unsettled. It was my son. He never knocked on my door this late. I got up and wrapped my robe tighter around me before opening the door. There he was, tall, broad-shouldered, standing barefoot in the dim hallway light. His face was tense, eyes downcast. "I can't sleep," he muttered. I studied him for a moment. He wasn't a kid anymore, but in that moment, he looked almost lost. Something in me tightened, a mother's instinct, a quiet alarm. "What's wrong?" I asked. He hesitated. His fingers twitched at the hem of his shirt, a nervous habit from when he was younger. "Nothing," he finally said, though I knew it wasn't true. I sighed, stepping aside. "Come in." He sat at the edge of my bed, hands clasped between his knees. The room was in darkness, illuminated only by the soft light emanating from the hall. I sat next to him, being careful to keep some space between us. "Talk to me," I said softly. There was another pause, then, in a whisper, almost, "I just feel alone." Those words weighed on me heavier than I'd expected. I knew loneliness. I had spent years wrapped in it, sleeping in an empty bed, eating dinners in silence. Still, he was young, full of life. He wasn't supposed to feel this way. I laid a hand on his shoulder, meaning to comfort him. A simple gesture. But the moment I did, his whole body tensed. I felt it. The air was heavier, weighted with the things unsaid. I yanked my hand away quick. "You need to rest," I said, much brighter than my real feeling. He blew out and scrubbed his face over. "Yeah, maybe." Still, he lingered another few minutes in seat, just sitting, until at last he got to his feet. "Night," he said, quiet, then turned to slide from the door. I remained there, sitting on the edge of my bed, staring at the empty space he had left behind. Something had changed tonight, and I wasn't sure I was ready to understand what. The next morning, I woke up not feeling quite right. I slept fitfully during the night, peopled with half-remembered dreams that seemed to leave this odd weight upon my chest. I tried to shake it off as I went to the kitchen, hoping that the coffee would clear my head. He was already there, sitting at the counter, scrolling through his phone. He looked up when I walked in, eyes lingering on me for a second too long before he quickly looked away. "Morning," I said, forcing a casual tone. "Morning," he replied, voice unreadable. I moved around the kitchen, getting eggs out of the refrigerator and trying to focus on the routine. But it was all so different. He wasn't being himself. No teasing remarks, no complaints about how I never bought the right type of cereal. He was silent, looking at me in a way that made my skin prickle. "You okay?" I asked, cracking an egg into the pan. "Yeah," he said too quick. We didn't say another word. Sizzling eggs filled the space between us. I wanted to ignore last night, pretend nothing was any different, but the tension in the air told me another story. I turned to hand him a plate, and for a moment, our eyes met. It was brief, but something passed in that second. Something unspoken, something I didn't know how to name. I looked away first. "Eat before it gets cold." "Thanks," he said softly. But even as I turned back to the stove, I felt his gaze on my back. That night, I lay awake on my back, staring at the ceiling and telling myself I had to sleep early. My body exhausted, but my head refusing to shut up. The house creaked in places, the woodwork groaning as it contracted. I turned onto my side, tucking the blanket in closer to my body. Then the footsteps. Slow, deliberate. My breath caught. I knew who it was before I saw the shadow of him move past my door. The knob turned slightly, hesitating, and then the door creaked open just enough for him to step inside. I didn't move. He stood there, hardly lit by the glow of the hall. His expression wasn't readable, his posture uncertain, like he wasn't so sure what he was doing here. But he didn't leave. I forced my voice not to shake. "What is it?" He exhaled. I don't know." A long silence stretched between us. He took another step closer. My heart was pounding way too loud in my chest. I should have asked him to go back to his room, but the words wouldn't come. Then it happened. A moment, a decision, something neither of us would be able to take back. Then he pulled away, his breath unsteady. I turned around. Sleep. He looked at me for a moment longer, then left. I just lay there, wide awake, knowing that everything was changed now. Morning came too fast. I woke up with my chest tight and the weight deep inside my stomach. The happenings of the night replayed themselves in my head on repeat. It was impossible for me to think about anything else. I needed air, space, something to pull me out of this fog. By the time I reached the kitchen, he was there. He did not look at me first since he was preoccupied with his coffee, but I felt that same tension in the air again, like there was an elephant in the room. I'd stop and hang back a second. "Morning." "Morning," he said, softer than usual. I went through the motions of making coffee, my back to him, trying to ignore the way my hands shook slightly. I wanted things to be normal. I wanted to pretend nothing had happened, that we could go back in time and erase the moment that changed everything. But I knew that wasn't possible. Finally, I turned around. He was watching me, eyes dark with something I didn't want to name. "We don't talk about last night," I said, my voice firm, though I was quivering inside. His jaw flexed. He nodded once, but behind his eyes, a war raged. "Yeah, I know." But as I moved past him, I felt it, that shift, that quiet understanding. We'd crossed the line, and there was no going back. I needed to be out of the house. The walls felt too tight, the air too heavy. I grabbed my keys and muttered something about running errands, stepped outside, letting the crisp morning air bite into my skin. But no amount of fresh air could clear my mind, and no amount of distance could erase what had happened. I aimlessly drove past familiar streets, past coffee shops that had been my refuge of aloneness, past the park where I once pushed a much younger version of him on the swings. The weight of it all pressed deep in my chest. I had seen myself in the mirror at a red light. My face was the same, yet everything was different. Changed. As if I was standing at the edge of something that could not be named. I pulled into the parking lot of a grocery store but never got out. Instead, I sat and gripped the steering wheel, staring at nothing. My mind contorted in 100 directions. None came up with an answer I wanted to hear. When finally coming back home, the house was silent. He was in the living room on the couch, staring at the TV, but it was off. He looked up when I came in, his eyes searching my face for something. "Did you get what you needed?" he asked. I knew he wasn't talking about groceries. I swallowed. "I don't know." A pause. Then, a small, almost knowing smile tugged at the corner of his lips. But there was something sad in his eyes, something resigned. "I guess we both don't." For the first time in hours, I let myself really look at him, the fidgeting of his fingers, the tension across his shoulders. He was waiting for something. And then suddenly I knew exactly what I was going to do. I huffed out an exhale, stepped closer, and he immediately sat a bit taller, like maybe he knew this was coming, and then reached out, not toward him, but to the remote end. I flicked on the TV. The noise filled the space between us, breaking the silence. He blinked, surprised. Then, after a moment, he let out a soft breath, almost like a laugh. And just like that, the moment passed. He leaned back, nodding to himself. "Yeah," he murmured. "That's probably for the best." And I knew somehow it was.